Dexter Henry here, along with Jared Schwartz. We're going to talk some Knicks hoops. And Jared, you were at the Knicks presser today after practice. This coming after the Knicks had the biggest win in franchise history. We were there the other night for that. We saw that against the Brooklyn Nets. And so the vibes for at least one game have been good. But news coming today because Josh Hart was asked about Cat's role in the offense and defense. He was asked this by Christian Winfield of the New York Daily News, and he had a response that some Knicks fans, took a little bit strongly. I've seen some of the chatter on social media. What did you make of Hart's response? You were there, and do you think this means anything? Is it much ado about nothing? What did you make of what Josh Hart had to say?
I didn't, hey Dexter, I didn't think it was a big deal. This came after we asked Mike Brown before that. They've said all season long, Cat has the biggest adjustment in Brown's system. Mike Brown has said that, Karl-Anthony Towns has said that, and they've
Yep.
said it over and over and over again. So we want, and he during this downturn when they lost 9 of 11 games, kind of before the Brooklyn game, Towns was not playing well. He was not shooting well. He looked lost in the offense. When Brunson was out, he wasn't exactly carrying the scoring load on his shoulders. Um, so we asked him again, how is he adjusting to it? And Brown said he's getting more comfortable, but I've also had to make adjustments to get him more comfortable. I've had to change things with the play calling, change things with the certain actions we do. I'm trying to get him the ball faster, trying to get him open looks faster. So then it was kind of posed to Josh, who is a facilitator in this offense.
Yep.
And I think the point he was really making was, there's a medium between player adjusting to coach and coach adjusting to player. And then his point was more, I'm more worried about our defense than our offense. Towns is going to get his points. He's going to figure out a way on offensively. I'm more worried about his defense. And then he had the line at the end where he said, I'm not worried about how many shots he gets. I'm more worried about how many blocks he gets. And that's, Josh being Josh. He's always making a joke. I think fans uh reacted to that and said that, Hart is calling him out. I don't think that's happening. I think he's just saying that, the defense is more important and more of an issue for the offense, more an issue for the Knicks right now than Towns on offense.
Right. And then when you looked at the numbers of the Knicks in the stretch, Jared, right, when they were 2-9, the defense was terrible. We just did a show the other day about the reasons the Knicks stunk during that stretch, and that was at the top of the list, 29th in the league in defense. That's not really good. I looked at Josh Hart making those comments and felt it was warranted based on what we had seen of this Knicks team over the past month or so. And I felt it was fair for him to call out the defense, which look, the defense looked good the other night. It was the Nets, but it looked good. When you take all that into the context, I take it that you don't have a problem with what Josh Hart said, saying that the defense has to be better. That's everybody, including Cat.
The funny thing about the Nets game is their net rating is gonna drastically increase.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
drastically improve just from that one game.
Right. Just
Um,
from that one game. Right.
and now we'll see a good test tomorrow with Maxey and Edgecombe, an explosive backcourt that the Knicks have really struggled with in the two losses they've had to the 76ers. But no, I didn't have any problem with Hart doing that. I don't think he was calling anybody out. The one thing that I thought was strange was last week or a couple of games ago against the Warriors when we all saw Draymond Green grab Karl-Anthony Towns' leg and drag him down, got a flagrant foul. Nobody got in his face. Nobody said anything to him. Um, they hugged him after the game. Coach Mike Brown hugged him after the game. And I thought that was weird. I think there is a place to get in someone's face. I'm not saying punch him, but I think there's a place to back up
Right.
your star. And the weirdest thing I thought about that was Mike Brown was asked about the play after the game. And he obviously coached Draymond Green with the Warriors when he was an assistant there. And I thought it was weird because he said that play didn't bother me. That's Draymond being Draymond. What bothered me was Cat picking up his fifth foul, and that really affected us. And I thought that was weird because not only did he not just say that play bothered him, but then he's going out of his way to single Towns out. And I think there's a time and place where sometimes you got to look at your star and say, I'm just going to have his back publicly. I'm just going to say, like, that's a dirty play. We should be better. And I asked Brown about it actually earlier this week. I said, were you happy with the response of your team? Your star player was kind of, part was a dirty play happened to him. And there's also a guy in Draymond Green who has said a lot of bad things about Towns on his podcast. If you recall, last year he accused Towns of sitting out a game against, um, because he said he didn't want to go up against Jimmy Butler. It
Yep.
turned out Towns was actually going to a funeral. After the game against the Warriors, Draymond Green made fun of his voice and he called him soft. So this is not a guy. It's not just a play. Draymond goes out of his way to kind of chirp Towns. And I asked, Brown about this. Is there a time when you got to have your stars back? And he said, first of all, I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to Draymond's podcast. But he said, yeah, we never want opponents to think they can do what they want with us physically, but you also don't want to get yourself taken out of the game and get a flagrant and then let that affect you. And I thought that was fine, but I just thought, in recent years, that would Isaiah Hardenstein have gotten in Draymond's face? Would Dante DiVincenzo have gotten in Draymond's face? Would even Precious Achua last year have gotten in Draymond's face? Probably yes. And the Knicks right now don't have anybody to go and get in someone's face.
I do think I love that we're having this discussion because I do think there's something to what you said, right? Nobody's fighting. We know this in the NBA. It's too risky.
Yeah.
Mike Brown makes that point. He's right? You don't want to get a flagrant. You don't want to get suspended. It's too risky. We know nobody's fighting. Is there something to standing up for guys? Yes, I personally think there is. You just spoke to, you mentioned a couple of players. You mentioned Isaiah Hartenstein, Jared. You also mentioned Dante DiVincenzo. And there's a thing that I've, doing the show and talking to members of the fan base, people have such an attachment to that
Yeah.
23-24 team, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes fans feel like a little bit of that is missing. Just, I don't know if you want to call it edge. I don't like, I talked about this on the recent episode of Got Game. I don't like calling players soft. I'm not going
Yeah.
to do that. I don't think you're soft when you're the Knicks when you've come back and won games like they have this year. But it does seem like they're lacking a bit of physicality, right? I think that would be a fair word to
A little
say
bite.
little bite. I don't think it's not that they want to fight back. And do you think, especially with, I guess this is where we wrap on this too, with all these comments, and we're hearing this and people reacting to this, and this might be some of why, Jared. Do you think this team needs some, to take your word, bite as we're
Yeah.
approaching the trade deadline? Is that something that should be infused into this Knicks roster?
I think sometimes we look at, changes in teams and, on paper and on the box score. Like, on paper, going from Precious Achua and Campaign to Clarkson and Yabusele, like those were guys who maybe have more NBA acumen and could help more.
Mm,
Um, and you don't think about some of the intangible stuff, the stuff in the locker room, the stuff that you can't quantify on the box score.
right.
Precious Achua is not exactly, I don't think Knicks fans are staying up at night saying, oh my God, we let Precious Achua go, but he was a tough player who brought some physicality and liked to bang bodies and brought some of that bite that, we're talking about. And going from him to Yabusele, I think had an effect beyond just the box score. It's a little bit of a bite. It reminds me almost, and obviously not to the same degree, but when the Giants decided to let Saquon Barkley go, like
Mhm.
they just looked at his stats and they said, a running back, we can, replicate this in the aggregate, or they just looked at his stats and they didn't look at what he meant in the locker room. They didn't, look at what he meant as a captain and a leader and a face of the franchise. And when these moves are made in off seasons, we look at the box score, we look at their stats, we look at their measurables and their analytics and stuff, and we don't always like take into consideration like personality and intangibles and what they offer to the team that can't be quantified. And I think that is something that the Knicks are missing, that can't be quantified. But I don't think do the Knicks do any opponent come into the Garden and are they scared of the Knicks? Do they feel like they can be out-muscled? Mike Brown has talked about physicality
He
a
has.
lot, a lot. He talks about it a lot, especially during that stretch where they lost 9 of 11 games. And there's a reason why. I think they lack a little bit of physicality.
Yeah, I wonder if that's something that could be infused in this team. But an interesting day, interesting time for the Knicks. Hopefully, they can build on some of what we saw on Wednesday against the Brooklyn Nets. You just talked about the fact they have a big matchup with the Sixers, who they've lost to twice this season already, both at home, down in Philly on Saturday. Everybody, that is Jared Schwartz. Does a great job covering all sports for us here with the New York Post, but he will be with the Knicks down in Philly on Saturday. Jared, I appreciate the time you come to talk to me about this, and hopefully the Knicks fans can calm down a little bit about Josh Hart's comments today.
Appreciate it, Dexter.
Anytime.